All right, we're in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, looking at verses 1 through 12. The first question is, what misconception is Paul correcting in this passage? And this is in verses 1 through 3. Verse 2 says, not to become easily unsettled or alarmed by some prophecy, report, or letter supposed to have come from us, saying that the day of the Lord has already come. This is the misconception that Paul is addressing here. The idea that the day of the Lord had already come or was very soon, like tomorrow or next week to come. And this seems to be commonly taught there in Thessalonica. Now, in the previous video, we looked at 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and beginning of verse 5, where Paul talks about the coming of the Lord. And in verse 2 of chapter 5, he says that it will come as a thief in the night. And it seems that perhaps some of the church brothers and sisters in Thessalonica had taken this phrase from Paul, maybe their own theories, or maybe the words of others, and taken them to an extreme and said, yes, the day of the Lord's coming like a thief in the night, and maybe it's already come, or maybe it's coming right now. Maybe they put a date and said when it was. We don't know the details of it, of course. But the misconception was seemingly popular and significant enough for Paul to write about it here. The misconception was that Jesus' coming was either already past or very imminent. The second question is, what must happen before the event he's focusing on, before the coming of the Lord? And that we can find in verse 3. Don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day will not come until the rebellion occurs. And that's the first element, the rebellion, or the apostasy, or the falling away. There must be a falling away within the church, actually, and the man of lawlessness is revealed. I say within the church because obviously non-believers can't fall away. They can't apostatize because they don't believe to apostatize from. So this falling away, this apostasy within the church, there needs to be an apostasy that was going to take place in the church before the coming of the Lord. And the other event is that the revelation of this man of lawlessness, or this man of sin. Now, I just want to point out briefly that Paul is putting himself here right in mainstream with those other places of Scripture that talk about the end of all things on this planet, that talk about the second coming of Christ. We have prophecies in Daniel, we have prophecies in Revelation that talk about these things in more breadth and even in more depth as well. And these things also talk about the prominent power who will work through lies, through deceit, through wonders. In verse 9, you see Paul saying the coming of this lawless one will be in accordance with the power of Satan, displayed in all kinds of counterfeit miracles, signs, and wonders. We see that talked about in Revelation 13. We see that the idea of a power not his own talked about in Daniel. In Revelation 13, it says that the dragon gives the beast from the sea his power, his seat, and great authority. So Paul here is just putting himself right in this mainstream of apocalyptic prophecy. And even I want to point out another thing that he says here. This is in verse 5. Don't you remember that when I was with you, I used to tell you these things? So Paul is just mentioning something that he had expounded on with them before. I think it's very important to know that the Christians here in Thessalonica, and probably in all the other churches, especially the places where Paul was, they were people who had been educated as concerning the events of the end of time. Paul says, don't you remember? I told you these things when I was with you, and now I'm just giving you a brief overview of these things. And so this is even before Revelation is written. Of course, John writes that well after Paul, even after Paul's death, Revelation was written. So before Revelation, we have these individuals who had an understanding of the truths of the end time events. It's very important as we go to the next question, because the next question says, in this passage, what must we have to be saved in the end? Verse 10, he says, and in every sort of evil that deceives those who are perishing. This is important. They perish because they refused to love the truth and so be saved. The individuals who perish here, they refused to love the truth, or they didn't receive, this is a King James version, didn't receive the love of the truth that they might be saved. In verse 12, so that all will be condemned who have not believed the truth, but have delighted in wickedness. Paul here is putting an emphasis and showing us the importance, particularly in the end times, in a time when there's lying wonders, in a time where Jesus warns us in Matthew 24, take heed lest any man deceive you, in a time when Satan, the father of lies, who's called in Revelation that dragon, the serpent, and Satan, who deceives the whole world, in a time when deception is rampant, in a time of the end, Paul is saying that those who will be saved will be those who love the truth and therefore are saved. And now truth, as we've mentioned in other videos, is a broad thing. There are many truths. It's not just truths about the end time, not just grand doctrinal truths, but those truths are included as well. But also truths about the character of God. Because, of course, if we don't understand the truth about the love of God, don't understand the truth about the justice of God, don't understand the truth of the importance of the law of God, don't understand the truth of the importance of the mercy of God, if we don't understand these truths about who God is, then we will be deceived by the serpent called Satan, who deceives the whole world. And so Paul here is saying, again, truth in all its facets is important, and a love of that truth is important. In the previous video, I emphasized that the fact that Jesus' coming is near, it drives us to have an emphasis on trust, on building our trust in Jesus, because that's the only thing by which we might be saved. But here we see another element, this idea of truth. And I believe these are the two primary pillars here that the Bible emphasizes will be important in the end of time. Trust in Jesus and the truth of Jesus. Trust and truth, neither to the exclusion of the other. It is possible, I will say, to understand much truth, a lot of truth. The Pharisees understand a lot of truth, but had no trust in Jesus. But I will also say it's not possible to have true trust in Jesus but not have the love of the truth. Because, of course, Jesus is the epitome. That's a primary element of who Jesus is. He says he is the truth and the life. And if we trust Jesus, then we will trust the truth that Jesus reveals. We will trust that if Jesus says something is important enough for him to preserve it for us for 2,000 years, the New Testament and the Old Testament for about 3,000 years in some cases, if he believes it's important enough for him to preserve these truths, if we trust him, then we would trust that he knows what's best, and then we would search these truths. I hope you see the connection here, that our trust in Jesus should drive us to love the truth of Jesus. And these are the two elements that will make it, that we must have, I should say, if we are to make it in the end of time, if we are to make it in the deceptions and all of the crazy, terrible things that will take place before Jesus' second return. And this is, I think, what Paul is emphasizing. I do want to make another point here. In the last video, we looked at the importance of the imminence of Jesus' return being a driving, motivating factor of our life. But here in 2 Thessalonians, Paul is putting the brakes on us and saying, hey, don't get too carried away with that idea that Jesus is coming and so that you're living life recklessly or irresponsibly. There are some things that have to take place first. So there is a little more time at least, right? There is a little more time at least. And this isn't necessarily what Paul is pointing out, I will acknowledge that. But this puts us right in the balance, though, that we need to live with. We do need to have a firm emphasis in our minds on the imminence of Jesus' return, but also we need to have a balanced view and being responsible and living a life, even responsibly, if he should not come in our lifetime. We should not put off things and say, well, since Jesus is coming, I don't have to do that. We shouldn't delay things and say, oh, because Jesus is coming, I don't have to do that. We need to be responsible, but still living with a mind towards the end. It's the very difficult tension that we find ourselves as Christians, but it is the tension that we must somehow understand and walk in as we live this life with Christ. But again, the most important points I want to draw out from this is that it's first trust in Jesus that should drive us to seek the truth that Jesus has revealed. The truth about who he is, about who we are, about who others are and also the truths that he's revealed to prepare us for the end of all things.